The Misfits. The people with opinions and the stories behind them. Argue with them. Disagree with them. If you're brave enough, listen to them. The people who think differently don't just shape conversations. They disrupt them. Because the Misfits aren't rare. They're among us.
Zolal Habibi was born in the United States, but her life was shaped by a country she's actually never been able to safely return to. Raised by activists, she grew up understanding freedom as something fragile, not guaranteed. At 18, with a full scholarship to medical school in front of her, she made the decision most people would never, ever, ever consider. She walked away from the life she was supposed to live. She chose to join a resistance fighting the Iranian regime. This isn't just a story about politics. It's a story about identity, sacrifice, and what it really costs to stand for something you believe in. Zolal, welcome to Misfits Among Us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. And please allow me to greet those who are tuning in to the podcast today.
I want to start at the beginning. You have such an interesting background. You essentially had what a lot of people would consider a silver spoon in her mouth. She was going to go to medical school. She clearly did well in school. She could have had this pseudo-American dream life in front of her, but instead you had a big shift and you became a freedom fighter, which that's to an outsider, that's crazy, right? Why give up being a doctor when to become a freedom fighter? You don't hear about this. This is like in the movies. So take me back to the beginning.
I am from the generation that I've actually never had the opportunity to go to Iran. I was born and raised in the US. My parents came to the US before the revolution, but I got introduced to the human rights situation in Iran very early on. I was probably only like 3 days old the first time that I went to a demonstration. So you could just imagine like growing up in that kind of atmosphere of activists and, parents who were very dedicated to really trying to echo the voice of the people inside of Iran. But you have to understand, like when they revolted in 1979, they had so much aspirations to be able to see like their country, flourish and be able to see like a true democracy after, being able to end a monarchical system in itself. The only revolutions that come to mind are the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the US independence. So it was something in that caliber for them. And then unfortunately, the revolution was stolen by Khomeini. But because of that, you saw this young generation that was very active and have that revolution be what it was supposed to be and not allow Khomeini to hijack it the way he did. 81 executions began in Iran, like mass executions. My father, who was a writer and a human rights activist, that was like his work was mostly concentrated on that. And so because of that, I got introduced to the human rights situation in Iran very early on. I think it was about like 4 or 5 years old the first time I met people who were victims of torture. They were staying at our house for a few weeks because they were testifying at the US Congress and going to the UN. I remember wanting to know their stories. Specifically, they couldn't walk. They were still in like a wheelchair, or they were, it was obvious that something had happened to this person. There were others who were able to hide that from me as a child, but I had seen one of them in a poster before, and I was like, no, you're that guy whose feet are all, torn apart and black because of, the torture and whatnot. And so they ended up becoming like my superheroes in my story, because I had met them and I knew like their stories, and they of course told me like a rated G version of it, but still it was very inspiring for me. But I always thought like that's in Iran and we're here. So I always also understood that I'm very lucky because like I remember having conversations with people even as young as I was like, as I said, 4 or 5 years old, that, this is what children in Iran, they're suffering this way. We need to, be their voice or understand that we have these opportunities, not take it for granted. But everything changed for me in 1988. The summer of 1988, my father was killed by the regime. That summer, 30,000 political prisoners were executed in Iran. So it wasn't just a shift, like for instance, something had happened in my life. Simultaneously, there was this massacre, 30,000 people had died, and it made an impact on the entire society of Iran. But even then, I remember because I saw people who had it worse than I did. Kids, friends who, some of them had lost both their parents. Some had spent time in prison with their parents. Some had, even been taken to a psychological torture. They were forced to watch their parents be tortured. I mean, things of that nature. And I was like, you know what? I'm very lucky in comparison. And I never saw, I guess, myself as like the victim here, because I was like, look, you're still very lucky. You have your mom. You've never had to live one day under tyrannical rule. And there's so much to be grateful for. I always understood also that if you want to drown in your own sorrows, at the end of the day, in my mentality, that was like something that it only makes the regime happy. And the mindset of a 7-year-old, that was my theory. It was that, look, that is the whole purpose of Khomeini. He wants to make you sad. He wants to make you feel like there's no hope. My form of resistance was not to cry. My form of resistance was to always hold my head up high and be like, yeah, I'm proud of the fact that my father dedicated his life or gave his life for freedom, and my mom has dedicated decades of her life now to the cause of freedom. And so I grew up with that concept. But growing up, I think one of the things that really did shape me was always, first of all, because of being able to grow up in the resistance, in that community. In the US, there's a very large Persian community, Iranian community. There are those who have just given in to the status quo, like this is Iran, so let's move on with our own lives. Back then, they were still waiting for that day that Iran is going to change and they're going to go back. And then there were those who were actually like, what are we going to do to bring about that change? And I belonged to that community. Around me, there were a lot of Iranians who I saw that they were passive, or like they were like, oh no, we don't want to get involved because it'll put our families in danger, or then we can't go to Iran anymore. We can't go and visit our families anymore. And I was like, well, isn't that the minimum price that we can pay for the freedom of our country? That was like my mindset at that time. But growing up in this community, I had a very large support base. So logically, for a 7-year-old to lose their father is very difficult. But I had so much people who loved me and cared for me and whatnot. I never felt that void in my life. And I think that was really important in growing up. And then I also had great role models. I saw in front of me, like, especially as a young girl, I saw like this line of female leaders. You know, the world was still, I remember back in 1996, I was in high school and it was the CSW, it was the women's conference in Beijing. And at that time, Hillary Clinton was first lady, and there she gave a speech, which to this day, it's historic, that she said, women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And that was supposed to be like very progressive mindset at that time, 30 years ago. And I remember thinking, what's so progressive about that? I mean, we have, because in the Iranian resistance already at that time, since 1993, the MEK, or the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, the entire leadership council were women. And so I was like, been there, done that. We're moving forward. If you want to see true equality, you need to have equity. You need to have women empowerment, women in leadership. That is what, pushes society forwards. Growing up, I had those role models. So that really helped. I realized, I think it was my junior year in high school, I realized I don't have a lot of the glass ceilings that my friends do as a young girl. I felt like there's nothing that I can't do. And because the motto that I grew up with was the motto that Mrs. Rajabi has. And she says, we can and we must. So even when it came to school or whatever, I was like, we can and we must. There isn't anything that we can't do. And so that was the upbringing that I had.
I'm so sorry. And anybody listening, I'm sure their heart breaks. You were this young girl, you lose your father because he just disagreed with a country that he came from. Here in the States, we disagree with the country we come from all the time, but we don't face repercussions like your father did. But I also sit here and I listen to you, and I hope everybody understands this. Your mom and your dad gave you this amazing gift. And the gift was this idea that everybody deserves to be free. Everybody deserves to live a life that they feel justified to live. Yes, you're confined by a number of things, but directionally, you're a free person. I think this is very timely right now because so much goes on with the Middle East all the time. And it's always one country hates another country. It's a different problem every single day. But sitting here, right? Because a lot of people are going to listen to this. They're going to say Iran, right? They're going to say, well, it's in the Middle East. This is a country of maybe terrorists. And you're sitting here saying, wait a second, guys, wait a second. This is a beautiful, beautiful country that's been under an iron fist for so long. And it's bred problems. And at the same time, it's also bred people like you who are sitting there saying, I want to fight for what I believe in. And I literally just want people to be free. I don't want people to be killed because they disagree. I want girls to go to school. And you and I spoke about this, and I want you to touch on it because I think this is so important right now in your story. You were Americanized. You were an American. And in fact, your parents were very American. They were taking you to protests. They were doing all of these Western ideal things. You chose at some point in time to put on a hijab, and you chose at some point in time, not because you were forced to, but because you felt it was your duty to look a certain way because you're going to fight the regime that's treating people wrong. And just to be clear, and I want you to touch on this too, we're talking to you from Paris right now. You essentially have a mark on you from Iran, and they really dislike you. I mean, if they had it their way, they would take you out in a heartbeat, just like your dad, because they know your voice, your strong female voice, is more important than anything else that they're doing. And I want to applaud you for that, because being a dad who has girls, I hope to God the one thing I can give them out of anything else is just the voice to always be present and the voice to say, I'm a person, I deserve freedom, I deserve to be seen. Which, like, I'm applauding you for doing this because you easily could have just faded into an American society.
I think it's very important to understand what is going to happen to Iran. A lot of people thought that with this war, the regime was going to collapse and then it'll be over. And then there are those who, like us, who have been in this fight for decades, who understand that everything's not so easily said as done. We are faced with not a classical dictatorship, but a theocracy. Like for instance, a classical dictatorship, like a monarchy, it gets its legitimacy from their bloodline or whatever. In a theocracy, it's based on they get their power from that religious entity, whatever that religious entity may be. In the case of Iran, it's Islam. The reality is that this regime has nothing to do with Islam. They're just using it as an excuse or as that tool to be able to suppress and to be able to keep their grip on power. So how are you going to fight this dictatorship? Because it's a religious tyranny. It's an ideological war before being anything else. So you have to be able to target it in that point that it tries to say, look, because like what does the Iranian regime say against like the Western governments? They're like, your democracy, it's like a Western thing, or it's your way of life, or it's your religion, or you don't understand our religion, you don't know what we believe in and whatnot. And no, you know what? On the other hand, you see in the Iranian resistance that the main group that has been fighting against this regime is a Muslim group. It's called the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, PMOI or MEK. They are Muslims, but they believe in separation of religion and state, and they oppose the mullahs like 180 degrees. For instance, the regime says women need to be bound in their homes. The MEK say women's empowerment is a key for society and for the liberation of society. All the secretary generals of the MEK since 1989 till today have been women, and the regime, well, unfortunately, women are just not seen anywhere in power. It's very important to be able to hit it at its root, and no one else can do that. No one else can eliminate completely this regime without targeting that root, which is that Islamic fundamentalism. So the antithesis to this regime is a group of people who are Muslims who believe in separation of religion and state. They believe that religion should be a personal matter for whoever chooses it. Because even in the Quran, it says there's no force in religion. One fun fact, there's nowhere in the Quran does it say that you have to wear a hijab. It just says dress modestly. And it's not for any specific sex. Both men and women should dress modestly, but it's just, a suggestion. People have to make that choice themselves. For me, it is part of this war because I can stand in front of the regime and say, I oppose you 180 degrees and I am determined to overthrow you because you do not represent that Islam that you're trying to say that you do. And they can't push me away because automatically I look like a Muslim. Here, I'm wearing a scarf. So what are you going to say? That's why the regime calls us hypocrites because they're like, okay, they're Muslims, but they oppose us. So that's why they're hypocrites. But so that is where it's rooted in a way. But aside from that, also in society, we live in a patriarchy, unfortunately. This is a reality that every girl and woman lives with on day-to-day basis. It's a reality in our society. I need to be steadfast in my presence and my opinions, in my statements, and in my fight. So my message, first of all, with my hijab is see me as a human being before judging me, like how am I dressed or what is my hairstyle today or what am I doing or whatnot. That is, just look at the message instead of just trying to look at me. I'm not an object, right? I'm not saying that other women are. I'm just saying the objectification of females is unfortunately something that exists in our society. I was 21 and walking in the halls of Congress about a year after September 11th, and with this hijab. I am who I am. This is why I'm here. Today, you know what? If you're starting to understand Islamic fundamentalism today, we've been saying this for years now. We said in the 90s that the new global threat is Islamic fundamentalism. And here, I have the solution to it. And you need to listen to me because I'm a Muslim. I know what is the antithesis to Islamic fundamentalism. That gave me that strength to be able to actually stand my ground and stand my position. You didn't ask that way, and that was fine completely. I mean, you were asking from a positive aspect of it, but there are those who like immediately, like the question that comes to mind, they're like, I've had people who have had this dialogue with me. They're like, you're very progressive and you're very open-minded. So why do you wear the hijab? I'm like, okay, the fact that you connect these two things together. If I was a man, would you be asking me why am I wearing like a tie or a suit? Or if I'm wearing like a, just like a jeans and a short t-shirt, you wouldn't ask anything.
You're sitting here saying, don't judge me by how I look. Judge me by how I think. Judge me by the things that I want to do. If you disagree with my thoughts, my position, if you disagree with my agency, have at it. Yell at me, scream at me, whatever it might be. But do not judge me based upon wearing an outfit that I want to wear. And truthfully, and I applaud you because wearing what you're wearing now, walking through government buildings after September 11th must have been scary as fuck. And I say that because the Middle East has the worst rap. It doesn't matter where you're from. Immediately, one person does something wrong, you hate everybody else that person comes from, right? Muslims are not all terrorists. Let's own up to that. They're not. And I'm hoping there's so many, hoping a majority of them aren't, because there's so many of them that exist. You're sitting there saying, my religion is misunderstood. My people are misunderstood. The things we hold valuable and close are misunderstood. It's complicated because they've kind of ruined it for everybody else. But you're the first person to sit here and say, they don't have Islam correct. Islam is a beautiful religion. Islam is not murder, death, kill. Islam is peace. Islam is prosperity. And you speak towards that. And you're standing up for it. Standing up for religious beliefs, especially today, it's got to be the hardest thing. And you're going up against an entire country.
Yeah. And
right?
I think it's also one of the things that always stuck out for me, even like before I joined the movement. I was like, you know what? The Iranian regime always tries to say like, we're fighting infidels and this and that. If you look at the number of people that this regime has executed, the most people that they have executed have been Muslims. The most people that they have executed have been actually thousands have been supporters of this movement. I think that speaks volumes. The regime felt there's no other way that I can push them back, so I have to eliminate them, to kill them. So that in itself, I think, sends that message that the regime has something to hide, and so they want that antithesis to be gone. They want that force that can really challenge them and reveal their true colors. They want that eliminated and they want that gone. And that's something that we even see today. Maybe a lot of listeners have not heard about this because unfortunately it's not getting the coverage that it should. But in the last month after the ceasefire, we're seeing a wave of executions in Iran of political prisoners. From these political prisoners that have been killed like in the last month, there have been 14, I believe, 15 who are protesters, people who protested in January and they've already been executed. Among them, you see people as young as 18, 19, mostly in their late teens, early 20s who've been executed. And you also see 8 members of the MEK who were executed. The regime is giving a message, and the fact that they're having these executions like one person or 2 people every day is because they want to prolong it to be able to spread that fear in society and send that message, because they could have had all of these people executed in one day and it would blow over. It would be easier for the regime itself too. But no, they're prolonging it because they want to send that message of fear, instill that fear in society. And the message is that we're not going to be overthrown with this war, but they do fear the day after the end of this war, because they know that today society is at a point that it's on the verge of exploding. If people were, if life was devastating in January, imagine how it is now. After all the killings, after the war, after the destruction and all of that, I mean, life is unbearable right now inside of Iran. And so the regime knows that another uprising and its overthrow are practically inevitable, but they want to see whatever they can do to prolong their lifeline. And so that's why they're turning to these executions. But what's interesting for me is now seeing the reaction in society.
NPR actually just reported on this May 6th, which was 2 days ago, just for whenever this goes out. May 6th was 2 days ago. Today's the 8th. And they said there's been more than 600 people have been executed since the beginning of the year.
In the first 3 months, there have been over 650 executions. And then right now, because of the internet blackout, today is day 68 of the internet blackout. So we don't have all the numbers for now, for the last 2 months. And then till January, February, March, there were 650 executions carried out in Iran. And this is aside from the thousands of people who were killed in the protests in January.
People don't understand this. People don't understand, being from America, what it means to be either forcefully taken from your home or picked up on a street or whatever it would be, and taken to an area, which in some cases is like a public square, and executed. People don't fundamentally understand. I think we take a lot for granted being in this country when the rest of the world exists the way that the rest of the world does. It's a number of the people that are being executed are people that are very, very, very vocal currently about the regime. People that historically were going on social media, people who wanted the rest of the world to kind of know what was going on. And this is kind of one of the reasons you're unable to return to Iran. I mean, you could go to Iran. It wouldn't end well. And I don't want you to go. I want you to stay away because we need to keep you safe. People don't understand religious war. It goes on forever. And it's so hard to change because once you throw religion in the mix, for some reason, it gets so much more complicated. I don't know why it gets that much more complicated. It gets so much more complicated. But let's just own up and say, because religion's involved, it is a religious war. Do you ever think this is going to stop? Because there's some people in Iran that are just drinking the juice and they're basically saying, I'm okay with this. Let's just let this be. This is my world. I'm going to keep on going on with my life. I'm not going to create new waves. I'm going to be safe being in Iran, but that's not the right way to view it. Do you think this is ever going to go away? Like, is this ever going to stop?
I think you actually touched on a very important point, because this is like one of the questions that we deal with a lot of times. It's just because people don't understand the context, as what you just pointed out. Usually when you have a religious dictatorship in whatever form in history, if you look, they usually last about 300 to 500 years. It's very difficult to have them unrooted, right? Right now, the Iranian regime, I don't think there's anyone in the world right now, even within the regime itself, that doesn't feel like this regime is on the brink of falling apart. The fact that in the past few years, the regime, every year they're celebrating the anniversary of the revolution. Before, it used to be the anniversary of the revolution. Now it's like, we made it one more year. And that is like their only message. We made it one more year, right? See, you thought we were going to overthrow us this year. You didn't. You weren't able to. But the reality is that this grave price has been paid to expedite this whole process, that the regime is now on the verge of falling apart. And that price has been paid because there is a organized resistance that has been fighting against this regime from day one, without 1 hour of break in between, in every aspect of it. Who has revealed the true nature or the true image of this regime to the international community and to the people of Iran itself? It's been this resistance from Iran's nuclear program. It was revealed by this resistance in 2002. With over 200, revelations that have been made by the NCRI. Iran's missile program revealed by the NCRI. Human rights situation. In the 1980s, it wasn't the age of communication. No one heard about what was happening in Iran. Who brought it to the attention of the international community? This resistance did, and it paid a grave price. The price was people like my father, people like Dr. Kazem Rajavi, who was assassinated a few miles away from the UN building in Geneva. It was people like Mohammad Hussein Nafti, who was the NCRI representative in Italy. It was people like Zahra Rajabi, who was assassinated in Turkey because she was there helping asylum seekers. So there has been a grave price paid for that, but this price has been paid. And so now everyone in the world knows that Iran is the #1 country in executions. Women are suppressed systematically. It's been condemned by the United Nations over 70 times for violations of human rights. This was not a given in the 1980s. And right now, even there are some people who are like, there are other countries who violate human rights too, but you don't hear about it as much. Yeah, because they don't have a resistance that is echoing their voice every single day in every international entity possible. On the other hand, the price that has been paid with lives, 120,000 who have gone to the gallows, but they have never given in. There's a video, it's going viral in the Farsi social media, and there's English subtitles for it too, and I could send it to you. Maybe you could add it to
Please.
this video. It's one of those who was executed in April. His name is Vahid Bani Amirian. He graduated top of his class from university. He was an engineer, and he was 32 years old. After being taken to a kangaroo court where he was just asked 4 questions and then he was given the death sentence, he said, well, we never recognized this court as an actual court, so we had no response to them, but I would like to record my testimony for the record, for history, for the people of Iran to know why is it that we're doing this. So he answered those 4 questions that he was asked in prison in a 12-minute video. There's actually a video that he had taped for his mother as like the final farewell, and that has been published too now. And it's interesting to see, like, this generation, they have seen nothing but this regime. They were born even after the 80s. They didn't even see those dark age of the 80s that we did, but they still continue this path and they still join this resistance, and then they're still this steadfast. And he once, in one of his messages, he says, look, I am walking in the same prison wards that those who died in 1988 massacre did, and I get my strength from them. They were steadfast, so I'm going to be steadfast. So this resistance lives on, and I think that's what's important. The reality is that this regime could have survived for 500 years with Iran's natural resources, but the fact that it has reached the point that they're on the brink of falling apart, it's because there was actually a resistance against it. I mean, just compared to other countries in the region, they had dictatorships too, but they didn't have a organized resistance to be able to overthrow it. So I think that's what sets Iran apart a bit. As you said, yes, especially because it is using the religion. A lot of times when you're in something, you don't realize it. I think in the history books, they will be writing about the fact that, oh, look, that era could have lasted centuries, but it didn't, because the people of Iran never gave in and they decided to stand up and they decided to fight. So the question isn't, why is it taking so long? The question should be, that is amazing that you guys have shortened the time by so much, and to be able to, have the regime reach this point that it is in right now.
Do you think that because of your resistance movements and kind of what's going on in Iran, do you think that it will be overthrown in the next 25, 30 years?
I think a lot earlier, but yes, it will be overthrown.
You do.
And the next few years, it's not going to be that long, but
it's a very hard group to infiltrate and change minds enough to see a change that has a domino effect to an entire country. Because they're not going to step down. This isn't all right, we made a mistake, we're going to go home. It's, unfortunately, they got to be destroyed. And this is a multi-headed beast where you cut one off, another one pops up. We know that old adage. So what's it going to take from the world? Because it seems like we need the right world support to finally sit there and say enough is enough?
Well, I think you just actually touched on a few very important points that I would like to just cover really quick. On one hand, this fight that is continuing inside of Iran, as you said, face to face with this very brutal regime, and it will do whatever to keep its power. And the world has seen that. Khomeini used to say, we will fight till the last house standing in Tehran. That's why you saw in January thousands who were killed in the protests inside of Iran. But I think what is really important is also to understand that the desire for freedom, it doesn't waver away. But I think that on the other hand, it's very important to understand there are a lot of people who might say we want freedom, but are you willing to pay the price for that freedom? And that's what's very key. And in Iran, that price has been paid systematically now by the people. I think that the overthrow of the regime is going to be from the people of Iran. So the solution is on the ground in Iran, concentrating on a strategy that we call resistance units. For the past 12 years, MEK headquarters inside of the country has been concentrated on forming these networks underground. These units, what we call units, some are like 2-3 people, some of them are up to 20 people, but they organize together and they're able to carry out different activities throughout the country and keeping the flame of resistance alive. So just as an example, in 2025, they carried out 13,000 awareness campaigns throughout Iran, keeping that flame of resistance and hope alive.
What does that look like? Can you tell me what that looks like?
Like for instance, be it spread like graffiti on the walls, be it they're doing these things like they beam a message onto like a building, and the regime has to like search for hours to find out where is this like coming from. That is, they're using like a projector type of thing, projecting like their messages on walls, and so people are reading these messages and seeing these messages. When you're in a complete darkness of tyranny, those things that you're like, wow, someone was able to do that. Or like even right now these days with the use of technology, they use these small speakers that you could put like a SD card in. They broadcast messages of the Iranian resistance or the leaders of the resistance, like their speeches or quotes or whatever, in like public places. In the bazaar, where are you going to find that small speaker that's like this size in the middle of the bazaar? Banners, hanging banners from the bridges, from walls, wherever, with the messages, today is this day, or this is what is happening right now, or like these short messages that send that message to people inside of Iran, or this is what we need to do right now. This is what you need to concentrate on right now. Don't fall for the regime's propaganda in regards to this issue or that. Concentrate on the purpose and whatnot. Unfortunately, a lot of people are arrested for doing these activities, but they take that risk because they understand like the importance of keeping that flame of hope alive. On the other hand, they carried out over 4,092 operations against centers of oppression. So like using cocktail molotovs or grenade launchers targeting these centers of oppression, the IRGC, the Basiji forces, or the places that, especially during the uprisings, that they were detaining people. Even during the uprisings in January, they carried out 630 operations, and over 2,000 members of MEK resistance units were arrested during the uprising in January. So they carry out all of these activities, so they keep this flame of resistance alive in society. And we saw 5 days before the start of the war, there were 250 members of resistance units that came together in targeting the headquarters of Khamenei. And that was the first time that something like this had been done in over 2 decades. And this was at a time that the regime was on heightened security. They had over 8,000 security forces protecting that compound, and they were still able to infiltrate in. Over 70 people were either arrested or killed during that operation. The message that they sent to the people of Iran and the regime was like, wow, the regime is much weaker than we think, or that they tried to present themselves, because their most secure location at a time that they were in heightened security because they were afraid that the war would start any day was, infiltrated. And on the other hand, it was the message was, this is going to be the new norm, a combination of protest on the ground and operations to be on the offensive against this regime. Because as you mentioned, you can't just protest with empty arms, empty hands, and the regime is going to just open fire on you. There needs to be this combination. And because that's same time, there were protests in universities on the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th of February. And this was on the 23rd that this operation was carried out. That is why we are seeing this new wave of executions right now. There's an article today in The Economist that actually points to this issue exactly, that the regime, at the end of the day, they know that like with bombings, they're not going to be overthrown. As we had always said, that something like Venezuela is not possible for Iran because it's not a classical dictatorship. You remove that top head and the system falls. It's not like that. They have an apparatus in. On the other hand, the regime understands, because it is the number one sponsor of international terrorism. Look at what has happened right now with Hormuz and everything. I mean, their geopolitical role, and also the fact that 12 other countries have been affected by the war because the regime has targeted them. They understand that troops on the ground is probably not going to be likely with Iran, because Iran is a very large, vast country. It's 3 times the size of Iraq, 4 times the population. We have every possible terrain that you could think of. We have deserts, we have mountain ranges, we have forests, we have the water on the north and the south. So it's not very likely. So they understand that with war, they might be weakened, but they're not going to be overthrown. They just have to drag things out, and that's what even yesterday they were saying. Look, we might be weakened to some extent, but we just have to drag out for like another 2 years, then Trump will be gone and we are still here. So that is like their methodology and what they think. So what can the international community do? That's what you asked. And also, this is why the solution at the end of the day that's going to overthrow the people is the people of Iran, because that's the only way we're going to see change. And also, you have to understand, in the last century, if you look, all the dictatorships that we've had in Iran have been installed, from Reza Khan to Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, his son, and then Khomeini, and then so all of them have been installed by foreign powers because it was what they benefited from at that moment in time. And yes, I know there are people who have questions like, they're like, Khomeini wasn't installed. Khomeini was installed by the West because it was a Cold War era, and they felt like, well, Iran is bordering USSR, then are we going to allow progressive movements to come and form the new government, or are we going to put in someone that we know is fundamentally against USSR? So that's why Khomeini was brought in, unfortunately. What can the world do? Mrs. Rajavi emphasized on a few things at the European Parliament when she was speaking. One was that all negotiations with this regime should be connected to the human rights situations. The fact that the executions that are happening right now, the halt of executions needs to be added as one of the clauses in any trade deal or any negotiation with this regime. Recognize the Iranian people's rights to resist in the face of this regime and to fight against the IRGC, shut down the regime's embassies, expel their agents and operatives from all the different countries. I know that there have been some who have been expelled from the US or Canada, but the reality is that the Iranian regime has a lot of their, agents working, even if in the US we don't have an embassy, but they do have representation there. And these embassies and these agents, they push forward the work of the Iranian regime on the different countries and different territories. So that was one of the key issues. The other is to recognize the provisional government announced by the National Council of Resistance of Iran. And I think that is very key and important to it sends a message to the Iranian regime when you recognize the resistance in face of this regime. And one of the things that might be very low key to some, but it can be very critical for the people of Iran, is providing the necessary technical means to ensure internet access. I think that is very key. And as I mentioned before, conditioning relations with this regime to the end of the executions of political prisoners and the killing of protesters, and holding the regime accountable for its crimes, because there is the negotiations right now. Unfortunately, no government has made a statement about this new wave of political executions in the past month, even though before, if one political prisoner was executed, they would usually make a statement. They didn't make a statement about the entire executions in Iran, but there were certain cases that they did. And well, this silence, this deafening silence, it serves as a green light to the regime, because the regime knows that everyone is willing to turn a blind eye right now on the executions, because they don't want it to affect their negotiations with the regime. So that gives like a green light. Okay, you have free hands till the end of these negotiations to kill whoever you want, and no one's going to react. The UN Human Rights Commission reacted or given a statement, but that's like about it. No government has done so. And so the regime, they've learned how to read between the lines. They know, so that's acceptable. We could still kill people like this and no one's going to react.
Is there a lot of brainwashing that's being done right now by the government to the kids to kind of say, this is the way things should be? Because if you want to stop progress, you go to the youngest kids and you teach the youngest kids that that progress doesn't exist. And then within a couple generations, we're not talking about progress anymore. Is that happening? Or what does that look like from like the younger generation in terms of how they're growing up on the streets of Iran, going to school, maybe learning what they shouldn't be learning, but yet it's required, so they have to?
That's a very interesting question to ask. The reality is that Iran's population has doubled since the 1979 revolution. So the majority of Iran's population, first of all, over 70% are under the age of 30, 80, 90, 80% are probably born after the revolution. So they don't they have grown up in this system of this regime. There's propaganda in all levels. In school, everywhere that you go, there's propaganda by the regime. And the regime is very good at propaganda. They have really become experts in disinformation, propaganda. They're very strong in that. But the thing is that I think they do try to have, like, as you said, there's this doctrinization and everything that they have to go through in school. When you want to apply for a job or apply for universities, you have to pass these ideological exams and whatnot too. So that is a reality in Iran, and it has been for the last 5 decades practically. People are now able to differentiate between that. A lot of even children, they know, like, oh, if they teach you this in school, turn it 180 degrees, maybe that's the reality. And so this is because their parents are teaching them this. But the reality is that, like, a few decades ago, like in the 80s or 90s, those propaganda really did have an impact. And even today, the Iranian regime has become very complex in its propaganda. Since Khatami's time, so back in 1996, 1997, Khatami, he used to be the Ministry of Propaganda before he became president. So he knew what he was talking about. They came up with this formula that they said, they called it 80-20 back then. They said you need to speak 80% against the regime to be able to send that message 20% pro the regime or pro 20% against the resistance. And over the years, that has now turned to like 95-5. So that is why it's easy to fall for the propaganda. And they're like, oh, this person opposes the regime. They oppose the system. They're also opposed to this resistance. So the reality is that, because the regime even says, like, if you start just talking positively about the regime, no one's going to believe you. So you have to speak 95% against the regime for that 5% to be effective when you support the regime or when you counter the resistance. The regime has created over like 500 books in recent years, television serials, films, you name it, it's there, and it's just like ridiculous. I mean, the numbers of articles and things that they write it's skyrocketing. It's in the millions, but they're very strong. You say lie big enough and you repeat it so many times, people start thinking there might be some kind of truth to it, even if it's not fully true.
It's been something that I've been talking about lately a lot, which is just the idea of truth versus lies. And now when you're looking at social media space and the internet and everybody has an opinion, the question really comes to who owns that truth. So if somebody out there is just repeating a lie, at some point in time, somebody's going to jump on that bandwagon and then it becomes real. We are past the age of communication and information, all right? Communication and information is easy. It's everything else now. And weeding through everything is a complexity. What does freedom mean to you now? Knowing what you've lived through, knowing what you've seen, and knowing where you currently are. You're currently sitting in a room it could be anywhere. And I think a lot of the stuff that you do is, and you could tell me if I'm wrong, but a lot of stuff that you do is because you don't want really people to always know exactly where you are because you are worried for your safety from time to time. What does freedom look like to you now?
I think freedom is having that possibility to be able to make your own decisions and choose your own path, to live in a society where you don't have to think about your safety for it to be like a given, to know that you have the right to say whatever you want or do whatever you want with respect to, basic laws, but to be able to have that freedom of expression, freedom of, to that free spirit, really, to be able to pursue your dreams and what it is that you yearn for. We always, say like, I have a dream of an Iran where cranes will be used for construction and not for destroying lives. A Iran that will be prosperous, where people could live side by side in peace and be able to just have that rich culture and history that we have flourish again among this society and among its people. And I think that have a country where people are free to debate whatever they want to and be able to speak their mind easily. You don't have to teach your child, watch out because your teacher might be trying to pull information from you or turn you into spying on the family. These are maybe very basics, but these are basics that our people have been for granted for a century. And that is something that resonates with me as a principle. I believe that we are, as a movement, we are willing to sacrifice everything in our lives to be able to give everything to our people. What can be like the greatest achievement of my life is to be able to give freedom to the people of Iran in return, to be able to gain that trust and create that trust among people of Iran that, they could be rest assured that they have their rights protected. And there are those who will never allow their freedoms to be taken away from them, and to rebuild that trust in society, really. I think that is something that's very beautiful, but I think that we can see it in the near future. The hard part of the battle starts the day after the overthrow of the regime, to be able to rebuild this society that has so many wounds that they have suffered from. We have the potential to create such a beautiful society. Iran is the #1 country in brain drain in the world right now. Just imagine if these people were actually serving their own people or their own country. And just imagine, like, right now, even when you look at those who were executed, 2 of them were sports champions. 2 of them were like the elite of the universities or everywhere that they studied. 2 of them were artists. These are the cream of the crop of the society that you're executing on daily basis. So just imagine if these people all lived and were able to pursue those dreams that they had and the futures that they had. And I think that hopefully we will see that soon.
You kind of had to make the realization about this yourself, and your parents helped you. They kind of taught you the path of speaking for other people and helping other people. But if somebody listening just feels powerless because they're one person, what can they actually do?
I think first and foremost, never underestimate yourself and the power that you have. Every single one of us can be an agent of change. And that agency is really important because there are those in life who are always just in waiting for someone to do something. You need to be that person who does something for others, not waiting for someone else to do something for you. You can be that kernel that creates that ripple effect around you. You can be that person, that agent of change, if you stand by what you believe and pay the price for it. First of all, don't underestimate your own strength. Second, know that you have the willpower to bring about change. The third is never wait for someone else to do it. And fourth, take those tiny steps day by day.
Most people spend their whole lives trying to build something for themselves, and you chose to give that up. You decided to fight for something bigger, and not because it was easy, not because it was expected, but because at some point you decided you couldn't look away. And maybe that's the real question this conversation leaves us with. When something matters enough, do you step in or do you step back?
Well, I think that that's something that's really every single one of us, we have to answer to our conscience. So every night when you put your head on the pillow, think to yourself, what have I done for mankind, for humanity, for whatever it is that you feel deeply about people who are astronauts, or they see the world from above. They know that we're just like these small cells on this earth, and our time is very limited. And when you look at history, at the end of the day, what's going to remain from each one of us is the impact that we make on society. No one's going to remember what kind of car you drove or what kind of house you lived in or whatever. And you can't take money with you to the grave. So what are you doing for society and for mankind? And I think that's a question that each one of us, at one point in time, we have to answer that to ourselves, but always be frank with your own conscience. And I think that's really important. And stand by your principles and stand by your values. And you mentioned something very interesting. I always think of that. You said my parents probably taught me. I think that my parents were like the best role models for me. Even though I lost my father when I was 7, I was separated from my mom when I was 9. So they weren't in my life during those years that I was growing up. But I think they taught me what's important in life, not through their words, but through their own actions. And I think I've always considered myself very lucky to have parents like mine, and very lucky to be able to live in a time period that there exists a cause that I can actually dedicate my life to, and to be able to have that purpose in my life. There are a lot of other people who might be a lot better person than I am, but they don't come across that path to actually have to make that choice. And so I'm always very grateful for having had that opportunity. The fact that I have a role model like Mrs. Rajavi, that has really inspired me in my life, and that has helped me become a better person. But I hope that one day we could share that experience with everyone else, for people to learn, because I think that every single person can learn something from it, have a part that they take away with them. I always consider myself very lucky to have that opportunity. I have gained so much more than I have given in this path from these personal experiences that I've had over these years in the fight for freedom in Iran. So I hope that one day we will be able to serve our people, and to be able to give them that freedom that they've been denied systematically under both the Shah's dictatorship and the mullahs, and be able to create a true secular democratic republic in Iran that is a source of stability in the region and not war and terror, and hopefully be able to change that image people have of Middle Eastern. I really do think that we will see a new phase in the world, maybe because when you hit Islamic fundamentalism at its root, it will have its ripple effect in the region too, and the world.
I do hope that whenever Iran goes through this transition, I do hope a woman can take over, because I think you touched on it a lot. It seems
well, right now, at least for the provisional government, we do have a woman as the leader, and her name is Maya Rajavi. I mean, I could speak hours and hours about her because of what she has been able to accomplish, which is, I think, in history, really. The reality is that the president, as I said, the president-elect of the NCR is Maya Rajavi. She is the one who, since 1985, she has been creating this possibility for women to step up and to take on responsibilities. And it hasn't been easy at all. She has been the target of many smear campaigns just because she has stood in face of this misogynist mindset. But she has really opened the path for the Iranian people and their fight, and with her own self-sacrifice and dedication. And if you would like to learn more, you can visit mariamrajaviforchange.com, and hopefully we will see her as the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran for the provisional government, because I think that she promises a new beginnings for the people of Iran. She joined this movement when she was 19. She is now over 70 years old now. I am dedicated to the cause, but I don't bear the sole responsibility of the revolution on my shoulders. She does, and she has for decades. And so I think that kind of perseverance and resistance, that resilience is incredible. And she is an inspiration to me on a daily basis.
Well, we are going to link. So there's going to be so many links. I just want to throw this out
there. Sorry about all the links in the description box.
I love the links. We're going to link to everything. I think this is something where if people don't really know as much about, do your research, learn more about it. The world is a very different place. And I think, turning on the news and watching a lot of stuff, even here in the States, you don't really understand or get everything that you should. It's really important that you go down the path of learning everything that you can. And this is a really important topic. And freedom itself is always so valuable. The one thing I do want to say is may your dad's, memory always be a blessing for you. And
Thank you.
it's hard. And I know it was hard that you went through that. You're kind of like a superhero. Like you're a really special person. You're a superhero. Your superpower is not laser beams and flying around. Your superpower is speaking for people that don't have freedom. And that might be more important, right? I think it's
Yes, that's very kind of you. But I think that it's really important to try to be the voice of those who are less fortunate or don't have the possibilities that we have. And it also makes you change your perspective on a lot of things and not to take for granted the freedoms that you do have. That's really important. And just final note, because there might be some who would like to become more maybe active or whatnot.
Mhm.
There is a rally in DC on May 16th at 11 a.m. and it's in Upper Senate Park in support of Iran, but also against this new wave of executions. Maybe some people might be here in Europe, but there's going to be a huge rally. They're expecting about 100,000 people to be in attendance on June 20th in Paris, and it's at 2 p.m. This event will be to honor the Day of Martyrs and Political Prisoners, but it's also to draw attention to the new wave of executions and also to call for a secular democratic republic in Iran. So if anyone is in Europe at that time or they would be interested, you could reach out to iranfreedom.org, or if you're in the US and want to join in DC, it's you can reach out to the Organization of Iranian American Communities, oiac.org, and they could put you in contact with local chapters. Thank you very much for this time. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and I've really enjoyed the conversation.
So thank you so much. And just so everyone knows, we will link to all of those links. All the links we're going to link. So be prepared for lots of links, and we want you to go through all of them. I hope that you do. So I thank you so much. I want you to stay safe. I want you to keep on being you. I want updates, and
Definitely.
I just love your soul. So thank you for spending this time with us.
Thank you very much. It was truly a pleasure to be with you.